I'm going to show you the 5 easy
We'll get fired up here in 5 minutes. Give people a couple minutes to get in here. Just a couple more minutes and we'll get started here. Pain in the butt. Well, honey?
Are you missing your star?
Yeah. Henry. Come this way. Come on, camera. Come on. Come on. Come on down. Come here, honey.
You're going to be famous. I don't want to be on camera.
All right. Oh, Henry the dog, come here. Oh, Henny. Woof. What are you doing, huh? Ah! 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 What are you doing, huh? That is true. He will. Woof. Woof, 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 woof. All right, honey, I can see you don't want to be here. Oh, thank you. Thank you for the kisses. All right, get out of here. See you around. All right. Henry the dog has stepped away, so we'll get started here. We should squat up right now, actually. Okay. So what I thought we would do is I created a PowerPoint that goes over all of the slides that the questions from the quarterly come from. So what we need to do is just go through those slides one more time, and I think that'll give us a pretty good idea of how to answer the questions that are going to be on tomorrow's quarterly. So let's get into this PowerPoint that I made here. If I could figure out how to do it. All right, there we go. Okay, so let's start by talking about George Washington, because George Washington is the first topic that is contained on that study guide that you got there. So on the study guide, I ask you to know things about George Washington's election and a little bit of his administration. So the first thing you need to know about George Washington is that because he was such a legend in the Revolutionary War, that when it came time to pick someone to be the first president of the United States, Washington was the only person that anybody had seriously considered. So the thing about Washington is nobody runs against him. Nobody's got the stones to run against Washington. So when it comes time to figure out who it's going to be, it's Washington number one, and he's unanimously elected president by the Electoral College, which means everybody in the Electoral College voted for him. Nobody voted against him. There was no one running against him. So first thing you need to know, Washington, unanimously elected by Electoral College, and nobody runs against him. All right, so that's the first thing we got to know. Then, let's see here. I've got a list of the three main guys who make up Washington's first cabinet. So you've got Jefferson as the Secretary of State, you've got Henry Knox as the Secretary of War, and then finally, probably the most important, you've got Alexander Hamilton being your Secretary of Treasury. Okay, so that's your cabinet right there. So let's move on and briefly talk about Hamilton's economic plan. So Hamilton becomes Secretary of the Treasury, and Washington wants him to fix America's economic crisis that it's in. So basically we've gone broke thanks to having borrowed all this money to fight the Revolutionary War. We win the war's over, everybody wants paid back the money we borrowed. So Washington sets Alexander Hamilton up and says, listen, you're the guy, let's figure out how to do this. And so this is Hamilton's 5-point plan. So one, you need to know this because there's one or two questions two questions on the test about the 5-point plan, and then it's also an option for you to answer about the 5-point plan in the written portion of the test. You can call it short answer, you can call it essay, whatever you want. You can answer this one. And this is one that I would answer if I was a student in my own class, which would be weird. But I would answer this question because I think it's pretty easy to memorize these 5 parts. So I'll go over them very briefly, and then this is what I would be looking for if I was grading this in a short answer format. So one, assume the debt of all the states. So lots of the states owe money for the Revolutionary War because when Pennsylvania sent soldiers to fight in the Revolutionary War, Pennsylvania had to borrow the money to pay those guys. Pennsylvania had to borrow the money to give those guys guns and give those guys uniforms and to feed them. And when Massachusetts sent soldiers to fight in the Revolutionary War, they had to borrow money to pay the soldiers to buy their food, to buy their boots, to buy their guns and their bullets and all that. So all these states owe money after the war is over. Hamilton says, I'm going to assume the debt. So the national government is going to take over the debt of all these states, roll it into one account. Number 2, create a national debt. So we're going to borrow money from rich people across the country, and we're going to use that money that we borrowed from them to pay back the other people that we already owe money to. So we owe money to the French, number one, but also countries like the Netherlands and Spain. They need to be paid back, otherwise no one's ever going to take us seriously as a country. So part of creating the national debt is we're going to owe some people money, so let's go ahead and get that paid off. So we borrow money from rich people to pay off these countries we owe. All right, number three, open a national bank. So we're going to be bringing in money as a country. We need a place to put that money. That's what a bank does. And we need to loan people money. That's what a bank does. So we want people across the country to have businesses, to have homes. They need to borrow money from somewhere. They might as well borrow it from the United States. So that's what the national bank does. All right, taxing whiskey, number four. So the federal government, both back then and today, puts a tax on whiskey. And you'll remember under the Articles of Confederation, our first government, the national government, couldn't tax anybody for anything. So now under the Constitution, with Hamilton being in charge of the Treasury, they can tax whiskey finally. So money comes in that way. And the other way is to impose tariffs. You'll remember that a tariff is a tax on merchandise coming from another country. By putting the tax on stuff coming from other countries, you won't want to buy their stuff. You'll want to buy American. All right. And so on this slide, Hamilton's got a problem, which is the southern states don't want to pay for his debt plan. Southern states don't think it's fair that they have to help pay off Pennsylvania, New York, Massachusetts war debt. They don't want to have to sign on. But he's got to get this deal passed. So what he tells the southern states is, listen, pay for my debt plan, vote for my debt plan in Congress, and I will move the capital of the United States to the south. And so the southern states sign on to the debt deal, and they get a capital in the southern United States, which is where Washington, D.C. comes from. Okay. So, political parties pop up pretty much after Washington. So Washington really didn't have a political party, but parties pop up when it comes time for guys to kind of debate like how America should operate. So Hamilton, he was a Federalist, and Thomas Jefferson was a Democratic Republican, and these are our first two political parties. So this is the birth of political parties. So the first two political parties are the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. This is what gives birth to the current two-party system that we have today. That's definitely a question on tomorrow's test, that the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists gave birth to the two-party system that we have today. Granted, those aren't the two parties that we have, but that's where the two-party system kind of comes from. Okay, and here's something else that happens during Washington's administration. That's the Whiskey Rebellion. So what happens is this. You've got all these farmers in western Pennsylvania, and they're growing corn. Now, normally, they would like to take their corn and sell it somewhere out east. But as we've talked about, at this point in history, there are no roads to take you from western Pennsylvania, where we live, to eastern Pennsylvania, where you might want to sell your stuff, right? So you can't just go across the mountains. It's going to be too much of a pain in the butt. So a lot of western Pennsylvania farmers just said, screw it. I'm not going to bother making like a 1 month trip across Pennsylvania just to sell my corn. Instead, why don't I just take my corn here and turn it into whiskey and get drunk? And so that's what lots of guys did. Now, they didn't all get drunk. Some of the guys sold the whiskey for money and made a profit that way. But either way, Pennsylvania farmers, western Pennsylvania farmers especially, are making whiskey out of all their leftover corn. Now, you'll remember a couple slides ago, we just said that Alexander Hamilton puts into place a tax on whiskey. So these western Pennsylvania farmers are being told, hey, you want to make whiskey, that's fine, but you got to pay a tax on it. And it was like a few cents for every gallon of whiskey. And they're like, I'm not paying the government taxes on whiskey. It's my whiskey. I grew the corn. I did all the work. It's mine. I'm not paying you a tax. And so they just refused to pay it. So the Whiskey Rebellion is these western Pennsylvania farmers basically going back to the old days of before the Revolutionary War. They start harassing tax collectors and telling these guys, there's no way we're going to pay this tax. They start beating these guys up, tar and feathering them like the old days. And that's when Washington has to step in and say, no, homie, don't play that. So what Washington does is, even though he's president, he gets on a horse and he starts riding out toward western Pennsylvania. And his goal is to arrest all the farmers who won't pay their taxes, because he needs to make a point that, hey, this is not how you protest. If you don't like the tax on whiskey, that's fine. But what you're supposed to do is you call your congressman, you call your senators and you say, hey, let's change these taxes. Or you don't vote for those guys when they come time for re-election. What you don't get to do is start beating people up and refusing to pay the taxes. So Washington and the Army start marching toward western Pennsylvania to start beating guys up. And when they find out that Washington's on the way and he's angry, well, I mean, his reputation precedes him, so people just immediately chicken out and start paying their taxes immediately, and Washington doesn't even have to make it the rest of the way here. So that's the Whiskey Rebellion. Western Pennsylvania farmers don't want to pay their taxes on whiskey. Washington, the man, not the city, Washington intervenes by showing that the national government is the boss. Okay. And so let's move on. So, after 2 terms of being president, Washington had decided that he had had enough. He could have run for a 3rd term. There was no rule saying that he couldn't, but Washington was a believer that man's job is to serve his government and then retire. Go back home and let somebody else have a turn. Washington did not believe in staying president for life. So, after 2 terms, he retired for no reason other than he just wanted somebody else to have that gig. So the election of 1796 is the first time that we're going to have an election that Washington is not involved in. And since Washington is not involved, we have people who are running for it. So what you've got now are 2 political parties running candidates. In 1796, you've got Vice President John Adams. He's a Federalist, and he's going to run against the former Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson, who is a Democratic Republican. So this is a tough election, but Americans decide to go with Adams because he had been vice president, and so in 1796, John Adams is elected president of the United States, but Thomas Jefferson is elected vice president because the way it used to work back in the day was the first place guy got president and the second place guy got vice president. And we've since changed that, obviously, although I really do think it would be hilarious for a world in which Trump was president and Hillary was vice president. I just think that'd be great. But alas, that's not to be. So, back in the day, though, that was the case. So, Adams is going to be president, and Jefferson will end up being his vice president. And here's how the map works its way out. It's not super important. You just need to know that Adams is the president, and Jefferson is his vice. Even though they are different parties, that's the way it worked out. Okay. So let's talk about some stuff that happens during Adams's administration while he's president. Probably the biggest problem was America's relationship with France. So we talked about how France and England are always at war with each other, and this is an instance where America, again, does not want to pick a side. This is a theme throughout U.S. history. So when they fight each other, America doesn't want to pick a side, and France takes offense. They believe that we should back them up because they backed us up in our Revolutionary War. They think that we should back them up in their war against England, but America will not do that. So in retribution, payback, anger, whatever, the French decide to start kidnapping American sailors and pressing them. So they board American ships and they kidnap American sailors. If this sounds familiar to you, this is the exact same thing that the British are going to do to the Americans in about 10 or 15 years. So this is a common occurrence. So the French do this, and again, America does not want to go to war with France, so Adams sends a 3-man party over to talk to the French in France and try to negotiate some sort of peace with them. However, they are not able to meet with the French foreign minister because he refuses to see the American delegation. So instead, 3 low-level nobodies from the French government show up at the hotel of the Americans, and they tell them, listen, if you want to talk to the foreign minister, we can make that happen, but it's going to cost you $250,000 in bribe money. And so the Americans say, no, we're not paying you one dime, and they come back home having never met with the French foreign minister. This whole thing becomes known as the XYZ affair because the 3 French guys who asked for the money were Mr. X, Mr. Y, and Mr. Z. So this makes America on pretty bad terms with the French. And as a result, Americans become very anti-French. They believe that French people are trying to infiltrate the American government, and French people are trying to overthrow Adams as president. And so because everyone is so anti-French, Adams has passed the Alien and Sedition Acts. So you may want to pay attention to this because my vibe that I got in class today is that nobody knows what the heck this is. So the Alien and Sedition Acts are 2 laws that we just kind of take together in one that were created by Adams and his administration because they were mad at France. And so they passed these two laws in order to stop what they think is the French taking over America. So one, the Alien Act increased the amount of time you had to live in the United States to become a citizen. So they didn't want people showing up to the United States from France and then like a couple weeks or a couple months later becoming citizens and then voting to, put pro-French guys in government. So if they increased how long you had to live here before you could become a citizen, then they could stop that from happening. So that's the Alien Act. And that was not an illegal law. There was nothing wrong with it. It was a jerk move, but it's not that bad. The Sedition Act, that one's a little bit trickier. Sedition is an old-fashioned word that means like betrayal of your government or treason. So the Sedition Act made it illegal to speak out against the government. Now, that, if it sounds a little bit fuzzy, is unconstitutional. This conflicts with the First Amendment to the Constitution, which says that you've got a freedom of speech. However, this law is saying that it's illegal to talk badly about the government. If you were to say, John Adams sucks, you could be arrested and put in jail for a short period of time. We're not talking about the death penalty or anything, but you'd go to jail. And so that is not constitutional. That's wrong. I mean, Americans need to be able to say that their president sucks. So the Sedition Act made it illegal to say bad things about the government and the president. So that law conflicts with the First Amendment. That's an important idea that ties us to the Virginia and Kentucky resolution. So Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, they were upset about the Alien and Sedition Acts, mostly the sedition part, the whole going to jail for saying bad things about the government. So they claimed that that law was illegal. And what they both did was create these resolutions. Resolutions are just like statements by a governmental body. And the Virginia resolution and the Kentucky resolution each say that if a state doesn't believe that a federal law is legal or constitutional, that individual states have the right to nullify those laws, cancel them out, and not follow them. So basically, Madison, he writes the resolution for Virginia. Jefferson writes the one for Kentucky. And that was these two states' way of saying, hey, we don't agree with this law, and we're not going to follow it. Now, we're going to come back and talk about nullification in the second semester. Whether you have me or not, it's going to get mentioned. But nullification is an idea that's not really tried. So like they come up with this idea, but they never actually have to try it because the Sedition Act just expired on its own. So we'll come back to that idea later in the second semester, but it's important to know that nullification is the idea that a state can cancel a federal law if they think it's wrong. And the first time we hear of nullification comes from the Virginia and the Kentucky resolutions. Yeah, okay, there we go. Okay, great. Now it's time for 1800. So the election of 1800 pretty much is a rematch of 1796. So John Adams is a Federalist. He's going to run for a second term against Thomas Jefferson, who's a Democratic Republican. And you'll remember that I mentioned that this was a very ugly presidential election. This was one in which both sides called each other names. We talked about how Adams puts out the truth about Jefferson having fathered a child, or several children actually, with his slave, Sally Hemings. Then I mentioned that Jefferson put out there that Adams had both male and female genitalia, and that wasn't true, but was pretty funny even for 1800. So it was an ugly, ugly election where the two sides are really at each other's throat. And so in the Electoral College, the vote was actually tied. And I believe I put the map in here. There we go. So in the Electoral College, the vote was tied between Jefferson and his quote-unquote running mate, the guy that he wanted to be his vice president, Aaron Burr. So the Constitution says when there is a tie or no winner in the Electoral College, that the election is thrown to the House of Representatives, and there is where there is a tiebreaker round. So the election of 1800 is Adams versus Jefferson again, only this time it's Jefferson who wins as president, and Burr becomes his vice president. Adams is completely out on the outside looking in. That's the election of 1800. Keep those straight between the election of 1796 and the election of 1800. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about the case of Marbury versus Madison, because this is something that happens between Adams and Jefferson's administration, and it's a question that you could answer on the short answer portion of tomorrow's test. So here's the story. It's at the end of Adams's term. He's on his way out. He knows that he's lost the election, but he's still president for a couple more weeks. And so Adams begins to appoint guys that he likes, who are Federalists like him, to different jobs, including judges all around the country and Washington, D.C. And one of these judges that he appoints is William Marbury, to be a lower level justice of the peace. And you'll remember I mentioned that they were trying to get all the paperwork delivered before Adams was done being president. However, all the paperwork could not get delivered in time, and Marbury's paperwork was not delivered before the end of Adams's term. So Adams's Secretary of State leaves Marbury's document that lets him become a judge inside a drawer at the State Department. Madison, James Madison, becomes Secretary of State under Thomas Jefferson. So he shows up in the office, he finds Marbury's paperwork in his desk, and he goes to Jefferson and he's like, hey, TJ, I got this paperwork for one of these guys that Adams had appointed but never got delivered. What do I do? And Jefferson says, don't deliver it. I don't want that guy becoming a judge. He's not like us. He's a Federalist. We're Democratic Republicans. I can't have that. So Marbury never gets his paperwork. Comes to find out he's never going to get his paperwork, that Madison has no intentions to give it to him, and so that is when Marbury decides to go ahead and sue. So he's going to sue in the Supreme Court, because there's this law called the Judiciary Act of 1789 that says that if you want the court, the Supreme Court, to give anybody a court order, which would demand they turn over this paperwork, then you can go to the Supreme Court and you can ask for it. And so this case is going to be decided by John Marshall, who is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And so what Marshall's got to figure out is, does this guy deserve his job? And he says, yeah. He says, yeah, you deserve to be a judge. You probably should be one. And Jefferson probably should give you this paperwork, but I can't make him do it. And here's the important part. Because you have come to me under a law that is not legal. The law that you've asked for me to make a decision, the Judiciary Act of 1789, it's actually an illegal law because it gives me a power that I don't actually have in real life. So I can't help you, bro. This sets up the idea of judicial review. Super important. Judicial review means that the court can look at laws and determine what laws made by Congress are legal and constitutional and which ones are unconstitutional. And if they are unconstitutional, boom, you can throw them out, cancel them, invalidate them, whatever. And so that's what Marbury versus Madison really does. It's not about this stupid court case, it's about judicial review. And that's what courts do today. That's what courts do today, is they review cases, through their cases they review laws and they determine if they're legal or not. Water. Okay. Back to this. Oh, there's judicial review. I had a whole slide for it. So again, judicial review is the idea that the courts look at a law made by Congress and they determine if they're constitutional or not. So you can make a law that's unconstitutional. It's up to the courts to strike them down. So if, let's say a whole bunch of leftist liberals came into Congress and they elected a super liberal president, okay? And they could make a law that banned guns. I mean, there's nothing stopping them from doing that. Yeah, the Second Amendment says that we have a right to bear arms, but you could still make a law banning guns. What would have to happen then is the court would have to use judicial review to strike down that law. So again, just because a law exists, that doesn't mean that it's legal. You can create unconstitutional laws. I mean, just a couple years ago, there were states in this country that didn't let gay people get married. That happened until the court stepped in and said, hey, your laws telling gay people they can't get married, those laws are unconstitutional, so we cancel them. So that's what judicial review does. Judicial review looks at laws and determines if they're constitutional or not. If they are, they can stay. And if they're not, you throw them out. So Marbury versus Madison is the first case of judicial review, and then everything else since then is about judicial review. Okay. So let's shift gears and talk about something else that happens when Jefferson's president, and that is his trouble down on the bayou. So Jefferson becomes president, and he's got an issue down in New Orleans, which is the city of New Orleans, which is on the Mississippi River, is not owned by the United States, but instead is owned by the country of France. And the Mississippi River is a big part of American trade and travel. So if you live on the part of the United States that's up against the Mississippi River, I don't have a map that I can pull up that easily through the system, so I'm not going to. But if you live near the Mississippi River, that's your way of getting around, basically. That's your super highway. So Jefferson becomes president, and the city that controls the Mississippi, that's New Orleans, is controlled by France. And so he decides we need to buy the city of New Orleans so that we can safely travel up and down this river and not have to rely on another country like France to give us access. Because if France wanted to, they could shut down New Orleans and America would be unable to go ahead and they'd be unable to go up and down the river. So America wants to buy the city of New Orleans. So Jefferson sends a couple guys. He sends James Monroe and Robert Livingston. Those are the two guys there on the left. He sends them to France to talk to Napoleon. He's the guy on the right with his hand tucked inside his shirt, weirdly. So he goes over there and he sends these two guys, and their goal is to buy the city of New Orleans. So they roll up on Napoleon. They're like, hey, Napoleon, we brought some cash with us. We'd like to buy the city of New Orleans from you. And we'll give you $10 million for it. That's a lot of money back then. Napoleon, though, he needs money. And so he makes them an offer that they can't refuse. It basically says, listen, I'll give you more than just the city of New Orleans. I'll give you the entire Louisiana territory. So that is what's the middle of the United States today. I'll give you all that for $15 million. How's that sound? And so immediately, Monroe and Livingston jump on this, and America makes what we call the Louisiana Purchase. So the Louisiana Purchase is the middle part of what is today the United States. It is everything from the Mississippi River westward to about the Rocky Mountains. About the Rocky Mountains is the border. So all of that land cost America a cool $15 million, which is $335 million in today's cash, and that doubles the size of the United States. Doubles the size of the United States, and today that's about a quarter, 23% or so of America's entire territory. Jefferson wants to find out what's out there because that land had been unexplored by white people prior to America buying it. So France owned it, but France didn't send anybody out there. They owned it but never used it. So Jefferson decides to send a couple guys out to map and explore that land, and those two men are Lewis and Clark. And so their goal is to go out west, make some maps, survey the land, meet the Indians, figure out what we got. And that's what Lewis and Clark are going to do. Okay, let's shift gears and jump about 10 years into the future. So France and England are at war again, and America again is caught in the middle, only this time England is mad at us. So when England and France throw down, we refuse to pick a side and continue to do business with France. England thinks that that's not right, so they start kidnapping and impressing our sailors at sea. America puts an embargo on top of England as payback, and then the British respond by getting the Indians to attack Americans. So we got a bad relationship, and lots of Americans are upset with England for what they've done, and they want us to go to war with England to get them to lay off and respect us. And so they call for war. Now, this is while Madison is president. Madison says, no way, Jose, we can't win a war against England. Let's not do this thing. However, he is intimidated by the war hawks. War hawks. The war hawks are, the guys that really want to go to war with England, and they intimidate Madison. They say, you're not man enough to go to war. They call out his manhood. And so he says, fine, you want war, you'll get war. We'll do this then. And so Madison has to go to Congress to ask Congress for a declaration of war. Madison does not have the power to just do that himself. So the president is in charge of the military, but it's the Congress that decides where to use the military. Does that make sense? So the Americans, that's us, we pick Congress. Congress can decide where to go and fight by declaring war. Once we do that, it's the president's job to run the war. So Madison cannot declare war himself. Only Congress can do that. That is definitely a question on tomorrow's test. Okay, we talked about how the War of 1812 ended, but I don't really have any questions about that. So let's move on and talk about industry and the cotton gin a little bit. So we talked about how the biggest problem with cotton is removing the seeds, because it's just a pain in the butt to do it. And it would take a slave 1 day to clean 1 pound of cotton, which is not a lot, considering when you sell cotton, you sell it by the bale. A bale is like a pallet that's pretty tall. And that would weigh 500 pounds. So it would take a slave 500 days to clean that much cotton, which is impossible. That just couldn't be done until Eli Whitney invents the cotton gin. The cotton gin seen here is an ingenious invention that takes dirty cotton with the seeds still inside the cotton balls, and using a series of brushes with a crank, it separates, it pulls the cotton apart, separates it, the seeds fall down, the cotton comes out the backside all nice and clean. This allows you to clean cotton 50 times faster. Henry the dog, why hello.
Hey, you gotta turn off the chat.
I can't do anything right now. Thanks, though. What were we talking about? Oh, yeah, cotton gin. So, cleans cotton 50 times faster than what you were able to do before. This means more and more people are going to want to move west so they could plant their own cotton. We'll get back to talking about ping pong admission, which is this idea that I told you about, where it was very important to keep the balance of free and slave states. So, the first 13 states to join the United States were 7 free, 6 slave. And then over the next couple years, we keep adding free and slave states back and forth, trying to keep some sort of balance. By 1819, it was tied 11-11, where there were 11 slave states, 11 free states. The slave states, those 11 would have 22 senators. The free states would have 22 senators. They'd cancel each other out. It's perfect. But then Missouri wants to become a state. Missouri wants to become a state. That's going to throw off the balance, because then we would have one more slave state. The North does not like that. So here we are again on another one of the questions that you could answer for the short answer tomorrow. So you've got 11 slave states, 11 free states. There's a balance. It's fine. But if Missouri comes in, they're going to come in as a slave state. If Missouri comes in as a slave state, that's going to throw off the balance. The North will be upset. So what instead happens is what we call the Missouri Compromise. So the Missouri Compromise is developed by this cat here. His name is Henry Clay. You can remember that because my dog's name is Henry. And in the Missouri Compromise, the deal is that Maine will come in as a free state. Missouri will come in as a slave state. They'll balance each other out. And then here's the important part. We will draw a line at the bottom of Missouri. So if you look at this map, you'll see, I don't know if you can see my cursor in this screen, that we draw a line across the bottom of Missouri. Boom, bottom of Missouri. And anything for future purposes above that line will be free states, and anything below that line will be a slave state. So the Missouri Compromise is a temporary fix. One slave state Missouri, one free state Maine. You keep the balance, and then the next time we have to do this, just look at where they are on the map. If it's down here, it's a slave state. If it's up here, it's a free state. This is a temporary fix. In the second part of class, in the second semester, we'll talk about why this is not a good permanent fix. All right, there you go. That's the end of the slideshow. So, here's where we're at. So, I'll take any questions now. And I'll give you a second to hear me say that. And you can type them there in the chat thingy, and I'll answer them. Do 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 do. Yeah, the question was, do all history classes have the same quarterly? Yes, they do, Brandon. They all have the same quarterly. Authored by me. TL. I see that. Chat does look a little bit toxic. Let me scroll up and see what's been said in here while I've had my screen full size and can't see. No, Cam, I don't think the test is hard at all. Oh wow, there's a lot of writing there. Screw. Okay, let's scroll. Yeah, clutter would never do this, guys. What's the minimum amount of questions? Or the minimum amount of sentences for the short answer? I don't know. I mean, really, you just need to have some... yeah, we do have some randos. You just need to have enough to answer the question. I know that's a terrible answer, because everybody wants to be able to say, oh, well, he says 6 sentences. I did 6 sentences, and it's good. No, RVP, I didn't ban anybody yet. I don't know that I know how to do it. Sorry. Anyway, so it's not like you need to have a certain number of them. Like, for example, somebody sent me theirs by email tonight, and I was looking at it, and, you know, I would say, like, they did the 5-point plan, and there was probably, yeah, there's probably 6 or 7 sentences. They were all kind of joined together. It's fine. Oh, his Brando kid's got clutter. That's too bad. Why does Grim eat pens? I don't know. Do you think so, Maria? I hope it was helpful. I'm missing The Bachelor for this, you realize. So... Next time, make a video, not a lot. I know. I wish I could. I just did not have the time. Julian, yeah, first and second points. No problems. Okay. So... the first point is to pay off the debts of the states and put them all in one thing, right? So that's assume the debt of the states. So all the states owe money. You're going to roll them all into one account. Okay, that's the first part. The second part is to create a national debt by paying off those debts from borrowing from other people. Okay, so 1, assume the debt of the states. That's like taking Pennsylvania and Massachusetts' debt. Okay, that's assuming their debt. And then 2, create a national debt. We're going to borrow money from other people to pay off that money, which is not a good policy, by the way. Don't ever do that in real life. Don't borrow money to pay off other people's money. But for a country, it works. For real people, it's not good. Yeah, Emma's right. I do want them short so I can read them as fast as I can. So just get the answers down and just move on as fast as you can. Maria asked, why is the state map only 5 points? You know, I just made the map 5 points. I mean, the actual map is the one that's 25 points. That's just making the map Monday night into Tuesday. When will the states be grade B in? I don't know. It's gonna be a while. Don't hold your breath. Over here on my desk, I keep just hundreds of papers that I've got to do and get in the book, and it's over here on my desk. It's on my agenda to do. Believe me, it's on my agenda. Yeah. Let's see. What was the other question I just saw there a second ago? Missouri Compromise. Okay. So I am subscribed to the PewDiePie, but I'm gonna undo that. I don't like him very much. Okay, so back to the Missouri Compromise. So here's the deal. It's important to keep the balance of free and slave states even. Missouri wants to become a state because they have enough people living there, but they want to become a slave state. So that would make them that would make it unbalanced toward the slave side. There'd be more slave than free states. Nobody wants that in the North. So what we have to do is come up with a way to bring in Missouri, because the South is told, hey, you can't have Missouri. And they're like, fine, we'll just quit America and we'll start our own country. And we're like, stop it, don't do that. So Missouri Compromise is Missouri comes in as a slave state, Maine comes in as a free state, and then those balance each other out. And then we draw a line across the bottom of Missouri. That's called the Missouri Compromise line. Everything above is going to be free. Everything below is going to be slave. Yeah, not a problem, Luke. It's definitely my pleasure, even though I am missing The Bachelor for this, if that's even possible. Guys, got anything else for me? You guys want to play whatever it's called? What's that thing called? Not Quizlet. Kahoot. You want to play the Kahoot? We could play the Kahoot. Hold on. We'll figure this out. I don't know. Desert Place. Oh, man. What role does the Senate play in the Missouri Compromise? So we've got to have a balanced number of states and senators. That's our issue. How do I get this Kahoot thing to work? Hang tight. I do not play Red Dead. I did not get that yet. No problem. So if you want to play Kahoot, go ahead, people. Yeah, there you go. So while we're waiting for people to join into the Kahoot right now. So the question was, who are the Warhawks? The Warhawks are the guys that are basic bullying Madison into fighting the War of 1812. And why does Madison declare war? Or no, I guess the question is like, why doesn't Madison declare war? What is happening here? How the heck? Are you guys seeing this? What the heck? Oof is right. Yeah, maybe make a new game. Wow. $274. It's a good number. Do. Yeah, I don't know. Something's going on. Do. Oh dear, we're back up to lots and lots of players. How the hell do I change this pin? Yikes. How does Rogeri even know who you are, Jamie? Nobody can. Study hall. Well, that'll do it. I can't. Well, you probably show up late to that, just like you show up late to my class. Two-step join. Two-step join. This may not work. Do. Yeah, it was my pleasure. Ooh, here we go. Now we're getting some people. Yeah, it is on a delay. That could be a problem. Yeah, you know what? The delay might really be a problem with this. Oh, good. Oh, I'm supposed to hit next over here. My bad. All right, if you said it would tip the balance in favor of free states, that's a problem because Missouri is a slavey state. Yeah. It's not the best way to do this. Okay, so he did not seek re-election to a third term because he didn't want to. He never lost anything. Because it was going to throw off the balance, Julian. It was going to add too many slave states. And if you're a northerner who doesn't like slavery, you don't want to have more slave states. No problems. All right, people, I'm thinking about wrapping this up now, but it's after 9 o'clock. If you've got any final questions now. Yep. All right, there we go. All right, it's been real, and it has been fun. And I'd even go so far as to say it might have been real fun for a moment or two. My sincere thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, take a moment to hit that subscribe button. And if you want to find out the next time I go live or post any videos, do be sure to click on the that bell button thing. That wasn't real smooth. I should probably work on my patter. But yeah, go ahead and like and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video. Now, I'm not 100% sure how to stop this, so it's probably just going to suddenly stop when I hit the stop streaming button, and it'll be very sudden, and there